When the town of Ember Rock offered a $100 bounty for Josie Cain's head, no one asked why a quiet wife became the most hunted soul in the territory. This isn't just another Western tale. It's the journey of a woman fighting to reclaim justice in a place where the law bows to power and silence cuts deeper than bullets. Did Josie really kill her husband? Or was she just the last victim of a rotten system? Before we ride on, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and join us in reviving true Western memories. If this story touches you, leave a comment. Tell us how it made you feel, what justice means to you, or simply drop a heart if you're standing with Josie. Now saddle up and let the dust speak. The dust never settled in Ember Rock. It hovered like judgment, clinging to windowsills and eyelashes grinding between teeth with every breath. July had come and gone without rain, and the wind carried only the scent of scorched pine and blistered cattle. Wells ran shallow. Tempers ran shorter. And every face in town bore the same drawn look, tight mouths, red eyes, and skin tanned too deep by sun and suspicion. They said a town this dry was bound to burn, but no one expected it would start with blood. Josie Cain walked through the back alleys, like a ghost still too stubborn to die. Her boots were cracked at the seams, her dress stained with road and ruin. The old sunbonnet she wore did little to shade her from the heat or from the looks that followed her like shadows. There was a poster nailed to the sheriff's board by the saloon, fluttering weakly in the wind. Wanted, Josie Cain, for the murder of Sheriff Leonard Cain. Dead or alive. $100 reward. Dead or alive, though the undertone in town made it clear, alive was optional. Behind curtains, women whispered her name like it might stain their tongues. In front of storefronts, men spit at her passing boots. Children were kept indoors. Strangers kept hands near their belts. Josie didn't flinch anymore, not from stares, not from slurs, not even from the preacher's glare, as she passed the chapel he once married her in. She paused near the post office, where the old telegraph wire buzzed faintly in the heat. Just across the street, Clem Whitaker, who ran the feed store, leaned on his cane and spat tobacco near her feet. "Killed her own husband," he muttered, loud enough for the woman sweeping next to him to hear. "She always looked too clever," the woman replied. "You watch a woman like that. Eyes too sharp, mouth too tight." Josie said nothing. Her hands curled under her shawl, nails digging into palm. There was a time she might have defended herself. That time was gone. She walked past the livery, past the churchyard where they'd planted Leonard in a shallow grave behind the steeple. Not a stone marked it. The town said it was shameful. But truth was, they didn't want to remember. Josie remembered. She remembered the weight of the pistol, the silence that followed the shot, the color of blood on the floorboards almost black under lantern light. She hadn't run that night. She'd stayed until morning, waiting for someone to ask why. No one had. By noon they'd branded her a killer. By dusk the bounty was posted. By dawn, she'd vanished into the hills. Now she was back, not to plead, not to explain, just passing through. One last errand before the ridge. A gust of wind kicked up dust along the street, and the world went blurred in yellow-brown haze. Josie lifted her scarf to her mouth, eyes squinting through the grit. Somewhere behind her, a boy's voice called out, "That's her! That's the sheriff's widow!" The crowd turned. Breath caught. Hands moved toward gun belts. And Josie Cain, wanted woman, outlaw widow, turned down a side alley and disappeared into the haze like smoke from a fire the town thought long gone. But Ember Rock hadn't burned down yet. Not yet. Night came down like a lid over Ember Rock, sealing in the heat, the dust, and the quiet venom of a town that had forgotten how to listen. The lanterns flickered in their sconces, casting long, nervous shadows across porches where gossip used to rest easy. The streets emptied. Doors latched. Dogs went quiet. and Josie Cain vanished again. She moved through the dark like a thread, unraveling from the edge of a world that never fit her. Her shawl pulled tight, boots muffled by the dry grass along the creek bed. She carried only 3 things: a torn scrap of a map, with hand-drawn symbols leading toward the old mining trail, north of Dry Bluff. A letter folded 4 times, addressed but never sealed, ink smudged from where her fingers had hesitated too long, and a gold wedding band, dull from wear, still warm from where it had rested on her palm too long. Each item weighed more than a gun. Each reminded her why she couldn't stay. She slipped past the last fence line behind the schoolhouse, the graveyard to her right, glowing faintly under moonlight. Her breath stayed low, steady. 100 yards more, and she'd reach the ridge trail, and from there, the Highland Gulch where no lawman dared to follow. But someone had been following her. The sound came first, not boots, not spurs, but the whisper of a horse exhaling close. Josie froze mid-step. The moon glinted off something beside the scrub brush, leather, metal, and the silhouette of a man, too still to be anything but deliberate. "Don't run," Josie, a voice said, low and calm. She turned, slow hand instinctively brushing the edge of her shawl. No weapon there, just the weight of too many stories not told. "Calder," she breathed. He sat the saddle like a man carved from night, broad-shouldered face, hidden beneath the brim of a weather-stained hat. A Henry rifle rested across his lap untouched. His voice still carried that rough softness, like bark stripped from a tree worn by wind. "I could have shot you back there by the feed store," he said. "Didn't." "Why not?" He didn't answer. A beat passed. Wind stirred dry weeds between them. "You're hunting me," she said. "There's a price," he said. $100 is a lot of reasons." "Is that why you're here?" "No," Calder said quietly. "But it's why I didn't ride away." Josie stepped back once, testing. He didn't move. "You gonna stop me now?" He looked at her, then really looked. Not the way others did, like a verdict waiting to be signed. His gaze held something heavier. A memory. A wound. "I saw the blood," he said. "On the floor. The morning after. But I also saw the bruise on your jaw 2 weeks before." Josie's throat clenched. She hadn't spoken of that day, not to anyone. "I didn't pull the trigger for fun," she said. "You know that." "I know," he replied. Another pause. Then slowly Calder dismounted, took a single step forward, and did the one thing Josie didn't expect. He turned away. "Trail's clear another mile," he murmured, "then splits west toward the mine. You'll want the higher path, less dust, fewer eyes." She stared at his back. "Why help me?" He shrugged. "Maybe I owe Leonard. Maybe I owe you." He didn't wait for thanks. Just remounted, tipped his hat once, and disappeared into the dark, leaving only hoofbeats and a silence heavier than truth. Josie adjusted her shawl, clutched the letter tighter, and walked into the night. The narrow cave clung to the ridge like a secret. Inside, Josie squatted near a shallow pool of rainwater, gathering in a hollowed crevice of stone. The wind outside rattled the brittle grasses above her head, lifting dust into the gloom. Her throat was parched, lungs raspy, but she drank slowly, as if measurement might save her strength. She wrapped her shawl tighter around her shoulders. The night was closer here, pressed heavy with silence. Out here the world felt less like accusation and more like testimony. Every pain in her ribs, every ache in her ankles, spoke of the journey she'd made out of Ember Rock and into something harder. Her mind drifted back. She remembered the first time she ever stood beside Leonard Cain, arms locked behind his back, as he proposed beneath the wide eastern sky before they left Springfield for this unforgiving frontier. He'd seemed kind, then gentle humor in his eyes, a steady voice promising safety. Their first winter had been lit by candlelight and laughter, by talk of a schoolhouse and a family. Leonard wrote letters to Judge Doyle, vowing to build a proper town to make justice more than an idea. Those early months felt like someone else's life now. Leonard's kindness gave way to demands: which neighbors they visited, what she would wore, how she taught the children. His jokes turned sharp. His affection came with conditions. The love she thought pure had come with chains disguised as concern. She glanced at her knuckles, cracked and red from gripping her travel bag. She'd grabbed only essentials: water, skin jerky, the map fragment, the letter, the ring. She'd buried the rest. She'd dropped the name Cain in favor of nothing, just the wind's emptiness. Someone cleared their throat just outside. Josie froze. Footsteps slow, deliberate, not hers. Calder. He emerged into the cave's entrance, horse pulled back, rifle slung over one shoulder. His silhouette was a tall shadow against the night sky. She lifted her head. "You live rough," he said. His voice had that faint shimmer and echo of memory, and something like concern. "No inns up here." She paused. "No safety." He dropped the reins and stepped forward. Dust rose around him. She hated that he'd found her, but she hated being alone more. "You shouldn't have come after me," she said. "I didn't come to chase," he replied. He scanned the cave carefully before letting his eyes rest on her face. "You've been here days. 3 nights. 2 days. You're weak." She had no retort. Heat burned behind her eyes as she lifted one hand. Ellie's hard edge. Had she brought him mercy or testimony? She couldn't imagine either. Calder knelt near the water pool, bent, and eased his jacket off. He poured half his canteen into her palm. The cold burned down her throat. "Why are you helping me?" she whispered. His gaze slid to the wall, where scratch marks raked the stone in shorthand: "J.T. Carey, take." Then his eyes caught something else. A leather-bound book missing its cover tabs, torn sawdust in its binding, lying on a ledge. "Where did that come from?" he asked, pointing. She looked, and then flinched. "It wasn't mine." He lifted it carefully. The spine read, "Leonard Cain's journal. Do not erase." The pages were damp at the edges, many blank, others filled with ink that smeared like memories too heavy to hold. "I never saw it before," she said. "I don't know how it got here." Calder ran a finger along a line. "Judge Doyle pressured me. Land titles consolidation. He made me choose." Josie swallowed hard. That entry she didn't remember writing. How could it exist? He looked at her, waiting. "I forgot things," she whispered. "Or I was never given them." Outside the cave, the wind stirred again. But farther down the ridge, another voice carried, softer than thunder, but more than rumor. Josie turned her head. A distant call. Judge Renner Doyle, standing at the main board in Ember Rock, addressing the townsfolk, heeding every shake of his sleeve. "This woman is not one you wish returned. She brings immorality, recklessness, and the ruin of law. She is a moral stain we cannot cleanse unless you good people ensure she never crosses our streets again." Calder raised his head. "Doyle's speaking now," he said. She nodded. "He frames her as the enemy of the social order," he said quietly. "You'll be marked as less than human to them." She clenched her teeth. Rage mixed with despair. A spineless judge standing in the sunlit street, dangling her life like a coin. "You know," Calder began. "He's afraid." Afraid of what? Calder kissed the journal spine, but not with reverence, with calculation. "It's not what's in there. It's what that man could do once exposed. He built Ember Rock on bones, Josie. He silenced people. That notebook, if true, could bring down the entire network." Josie stared at the broken leather, at the missing pages. Leonard's handwriting appeared honest, terrified in places, and hopeful in others. And broken. She swallowed. "I always trusted Leonard," she said. "The first Leonard, maybe. But the second." Calder looked at her. "Someone erased parts of that journal. Someone stole proof. She leaned back against stone hard as sin. Dust motes drifted above her. The first tear came then, slick in the moonlight, tealant in the hush between them. He didn't say anything. He rested the journal beside her, poured another sip of water. "You're stronger than you remember," he murmured. She curled her fingers around the ring in her pocket. The letter was still folded in her bodice. The map scrap lay damp, but intact. Choices lay before her now, not just to flee but to return. Not just to survive but to reclaim. Night outside remained unbroken, but the cave had shifted. Cold shadows gleamed with purpose. And Josie Cain, outlaw or not, felt something she hadn't in weeks, a flicker of proof that escape was no longer enough. Moonlight guided them along the narrow trail as they descended from the ridge toward the scrublands below. Each crunch of gravel underfoot echoed in the still night, marking the fragile alliance limping into existence between Josie Cain and Calder Hoyt. They'd come together abruptly, fired by desperation. Flickering lantern light in a barnyard, Calder had spotted Tommy Josie's stepson tied to a post and bruised from neglect. Leonard's boy had been snatched by Deputy Ward, and two masked men, their intent obvious, lever Josie back to Ember Rock. "She's using him," Calder rumbled, voice tight as the reins in his hand, threatening to cut the ransom or worse. Josie stared at the distant outline of Ember Rock, under stars, her heart like dry driftwood. "I knew they'd hold him. I didn't think," she swallowed. "I didn't think they'd go this far." Calder shifted. "We don't have time to count wrong assumptions." They paused beneath the lone juniper, sharing the meager remains of their supper, cold beans from a tin, stale bread, some jerky. The only heat rose in silence. Calder's eyes reflected the flame light of a small campfire, but anger and decision bubbled beneath. "It's not what they say," he said after a slow chew of bread. "You're guilty in their story, but stories break when truth steps in." Josie drank water in long sips, defiance hardening her jaw. "So you trust me now?" He hedged a moment. "I've seen men kill for less reason than your name." Later, he lit a small lamp, passing it to her. He stood back as she unfolded a page of Leonard's letter, brought from Ember Rock. Under the jagged letters, she read loud, softly, voice brittle but steady. Calder watched each tremor in her vocal cords, a witness more than judge. When the fires burned low, they lay side by side. Calder offered her a flannel shirt to wrap around her shoulders. She stayed silent. "I could have chased before," she whispered. "Got the bounty," vanished again. He turned away, to stare into the black. "I remember something," he finally said. "Years ago I hunted a man for coin. Turned out he was innocent. Sheriff got the heads up too late. He died under my bullet." She didn't speak. A moment of raw grief hung between them. "I carry his face sometimes," Calder said. "I don't want another." Josie pressed her lips together. Forgiveness was not yet an option, but trust felt less distant. At dawn, they resumed their journey, cliffs and gullies shifting in pale haze. Each step northward carried them away from Ember Rock, or deeper into meaning. They neared a fork in the trail marked on the map fragment. Josie unfolded it, tracing her finger over the drawn symbols. "This way," she said, pointing to a faint line that split west. Calder nodded. They walked in tandem, weapons strapped and senses sharp. Then came the snap of twigs, someone trailing them. A rider burst through with a double-barrel shotgun, leveled face, masked by scarf. Josie froze. Calder raised his rifle, hand steady. The man shouted, "Josie Cain, stop running. You're under arrest." Adrenaline pushed through Josie's limbs. She stood rigid, shaking. Calder weighed his options, enforce the bounty, or protect the fragile truth blossoming between them. Before he could act, Josie did. Her hand darted to her revolver belt. She fired. The .45 thundered in the open. The man dropped, sliding to the dirt. Silence. Dust stirred in the sunlit gap. Calder stared at her, shock, respect, horror, all tangled in his gaze. Josie stared too, looking at him, looking at the dying shape of the rider. She hadn't intended killing, only delay. Yet the recoil crashed inside her. She stepped back. Her breath lost rhythm. Josie Calder said softly, "Are you?" She shook her head, tears brimming. It wasn't meant to kill. He knelt beside the man, checked a flicker of pulse, then closed his eyes. The man was dead. Calder turned to Josie, face gentle torn. "You shot," he whispered. "You did what you had to." She twisted, fleeing. She stumbled through sagebrush, crashing through low branches. Calder's voice called after her, but she vanished over the ridge. Hours later, Josie reached a hidden ravine leaning against cliff rock. Blood pounded in her ears, not just from exertion, but from the weight of what she'd done. She pressed a hand to her side, checking no wound. It was internal. The shock hollowed her chest. Tears slid down her dust-smeared face. Her hand shook around the map scrap. Leonard's ring weighed her pocket, heavy with dissonance. The letter unread in her bag felt sudden, impossible. Back on the ridge trail, Calder returned silently. He approached her from the edge of the ravine like a shadow, reluctant, but resolute. Josie looked up, hollow and exhausted, and he sat beside her. Without speaking, he pressed the canteen to her lips. The water soothed but didn't cleanse shame. Her voice came cracked. "First kill." He nodded once. "Second chance." She exhaled a raw breath that tasted of loss and purpose. They did not sleep there. She stood slow, brushing hair from her face. Calder helped her rise without touching her arm, just presence enough. They resumed north as twilight draped over cliffs. The silence between them was not empty. It held the echo of decisions taken, loyalties shaken, and a partnership sealed in blood and fear. They approached the abandoned miner's way station, marked on his map. Shadows pooled in corners. Doors hung loose, windows blown or boarded. Inside they found simple crates, old benches, and fresh tracks leading east away. Calder knelt and traced hoofprints in dirt. The missing child, Tommy, had been moved. Josie watched the sky darken beyond the cottage frame. Stars glinted like chance. She wiped dust from her cheeks. She lifted Calder's gaze. "We keep going," she said. He stood, saluted her with head nod. "Always." They reached the derelict church, just as dusk bled into the sky. A small wooden structure half swallowed by sagebrush, its steeple creaking in the wind. The windows were shattered, doors hung off hinges, and shards of stained glass lay glittering in the dust like fragments of memory. This was where Leonard Cain kept his journal, she remembered. They entered cautiously. Calder pushed open the chapel door, its groan an echo of authority abandoned. Pews lay overturned, altar cracked. Light slanted through broken roof beams, painting the floor in mottled gold. At the pulpit stood a box, beneath a faded Bible. Josie lifted a stiff hand and opened it. There lay the leather-bound journal, protected by cedar bark strips. It smelled faintly of pine and despair. Calder pulled a match, lit a lantern, and passed it. The flame danced across pages. Josie gently peeled the cover back. Leonard's handwriting inked across fine pages, passages heavy with regret, entries encrypted in shorthand. She read the earliest notes aloud, voice soft but steady. "Renner Doyle presses me force. Consolidation of homesteads. Lending rights, land titles from farmers. He says he'll owe me favors once I take the chair. But I see too many people suffering." Another entry I found, evidence, a ledger. He's skimming over 100 claims, bank, slush funds, silent partnerships. I intend to go to the territory judge. There were blank pages and veiled threats scrawled beneath. Josie's chest tightened as truths collided. Leonard was not innocent. Yet he hadn't been the devil. He'd tried to expose Doyle. But someone erased those pages, torn, crudely reversed, and reconciled. The last entry she read by candlelight. If anything happens to me, let this journal speak. Ember Rock must hear. She looked at Calder. Her voice trembled. He thought he was doing good. Calder nodded slowly, his silhouette trembling in flame shadows. But that made him dangerous. Lightning cracked across the ridge. The small church shuddered. Snake brush rattled outside. Then came footsteps. Men's boots on broken wood. Calder's rifle cracked free from his back in one motion. Josie barely had time to move before a shot rang. The journal slipped from her grasp, and pages spread across the floor like fallen feathers. Calder fired once, then again. A man staggered through the doorway. Deputy Ward's man, face masked, but body broad and menacing. Calder rushed forward, but another sprung from the pews, sliding behind a splintered pew, pistol drawn. Calder felt a searing pain explode in his shoulder where a ball found flesh. He hissed, stumbled, and Josie lunged forward, gripping his arm. "You shot," she whispered, panic high. Calder's breath was ragged. "My shoulder. Hold them." Gritting pain, he steadied. Josie swung Leonard's heavy journal as though it were a club. She knocked aside one attacker, then grabbed the fallen pistol and fired twice, once hitting a kneecap, once missing and cutting air near the second man. Blood seeped through Calder's shirt. He collapsed against a pew, face ashen. Josie dropped to her knees beside him. She pressed rough hands to both ends of the wound, tears mixing with sweat. "Stay with me," she said. "You can't die now." Calder's fingers twitched. You did well," he said, voice thin. "Too damn well." Sirens, no distant shouts echoed in the ruined sanctuary. Ember Rock's men had followed their trail. Josie straightened, took a steadying breath, and loading another round. "Go," Calder gasped. "Protect the journal. Finish what he started." "I won't leave you," she protested. He clutched her sleeve. "I saved Leonard's life once. Twice is too many." Her eyes provoked no. Then he let go, slumping back. The other man cleared his throat, toothpick clacking. "Lady Cain is truly dangerous." Josie raised her pistol again. Fear, fury, and grief roared through her. But in that moment, Calder groaned low, and she looked back to face her betrayal. The man who once held her by the arm, the ghost of her marriage and mine, and he lay, bleeding, trusting her. With a final look, she pivoted, racing through the broken doorway into gray light, dragging the journal close, leaving the sound of gun sequences behind and the scent of blood-soaked wood in the ruined chapel. Outside, dust swirled. Her breathing tore, ragged tears stung her eyes. She stumbled forward along the trail, shaking off pursuit and the memory of a man who once shot before thinking. Josie emerged from the ravine before sunrise, guiding Calder through the thin air of dawn, toward the only refuge she could trust, Sadie Quinn's cabin. It stood on the edge of Ember Rock's outskirts, battered by drought and whispered rumors. Sadie was known as the woman whose husband once claimed Josie and who never suffered for it. Josie knocked on the weathered door, hands shaking. Pain simmered in her ribs, and the journal pressed heavy in her bag. Sadie opened the door just enough to reveal one sharp eye and a face drawn tight. Without greeting, she stepped aside. "I know why you're here," Sadie said before Josie spoke. Her voice was flat, but not unkind. "First time you visited, not likely." Josie swallowed. "He's hurt. He needs help." Sadie crossed her arms. "How dare you after what he took from me?" "I'm not the same person," Josie argued, voice cracking. "He, my husband, did things I didn't know. I never wanted any of it." Sadie watched steel tempered by betrayal. She slammed the door open wider. "Bring him in." Inside, the cabin smelled of wood stove, smoke, herbs drying from rafters, and grit of sand that blew through every crack. Sadie led them to a low cot. Josie laid Calder down, ripped open his shirt, pressed a cloth to the wound, rinsed and applied makeshift bandages, while Sadie brought water and salve. Sadie's expression softened as she watched Josie tend Calder, with hands that trembled but worked with purpose. The silence was rich, uneasy for a moment, broken only when Josie looked up, eyes red, lips pressed thin. Sadie cleared her throat. "Why help him? So quick. He could die as could you." Josie tilted her head. "You taught me strength once, but also coldness. Pain taught too much." Sadie's jaw clenched. "Leonard." She spat the name. "He came to me once late dusk, said he had proof. Wanted to expose Renner Doyle's operation, but he couldn't come alone. Wanted lawyers' help, maybe mine." Sadie wiped dust from a shelf. "Judge Renner Doyle offered Leonard the job of sheriff in Ember Rock if he'd keep quiet. He said he'd divide the land sales. The money." Leonard refused. "Doyle said no one would believe a preacher's wife, so I'd keep quiet or I'd lose everything too." Josie's breath hitched. She looked over. Calder saw him, pale but breathing. Her own heart seemed to pulse on its own. "I see why he died," Sadie went on. "Not for land, but for leverage. His silence made you suspect. His words, if voiced, could have cost Doyle everything." Josie closed her eyes. Forgiveness felt distant, but not impossible. She pressed a finger to her lips. "I thought I was wrong for loving him. I built a truth in my head about what marriage should be. Now I see it wasn't mine." Sadie sank into a wooden chair. "You loved a man. That's fine. But you don't owe the man you were. You owe the one you've become." Time slowed. Calder whimpered. Josie leaned closer. Sadie stepped away. The lamp above them flickered harshly. Calder's eyes cracked open. He looked at Josie. Sorrow clicked deep in his face. Josie held out her hand. Hesitating, he reached and pressed his palm over hers. It wasn't warmth, not exactly, more like fragile ice still intact. She closed her fingers. Tears slipped down her cheeks. "She's like me," Sadie said softly, motioning to them. "Rooted in waste, bleeding into something new." Josie looked at the journal on the table, pages stained, snapped shut. She nodded once quietly. She left Calder sleeping on the cot, stepping closer to Sadie. The older woman poured 2 cups of weak tea, sage and mint. Sadie slid 1 cup to Josie. "Drink. Good for the hurt." Josie sipped, bitterness and comfort tangled on her tongue. "They'll come for the boy next," Sadie said, glancing to the trapdoor in the corner. Her tone rested on flat worry, not warning. "I'll save him," Josie promised. Sadie nodded. "And I'll pray you do." Outside, the dust rose, a silent witness to footprints disappearing across parched earth. Josie pulled on her coat. Calder still slept. She touched the knuckled ring in her pocket, cold but certain. She stepped into morning light, Sadie at the door. No words between them. Only an understanding. Both survivors, both changed. Josie moved north again, weighted by grief, but guided by truth. The journal hugged against her side. The map's path lay ahead. She was no longer the naive wife of Ember Rock. She was something forged by pain, determination, and a promise to finish Leonard's work. Night wrapped Ember Rock in stillness, when Josie and Calder slipped through the shadows and back into the town she once called home. Nary a lantern burned in the usual places. The saloon had drawn its blinds. The storefronts stood dark and empty. Only the sheriff's board glowed in the square, though its wanted poster was now gone, replaced by a blank plank. The air tasted of dust and unfinished business. Calder guided her toward Sadie's wagon, hidden behind the chapel. Inside, Josie checked her boots, tightened her shawl, and cradled the leather-bound journal along with the folded letter from Leonard Cain. They had come back not to plead, but to confront. At dawn, Ember Rock's market opened as usual. Trade of livestock, dried beans, sewing, notions, and whispers. Townsfolk gathered near the gazebo at the heart of the square, murmuring about drought land taxes and the missing sheriff. Judge Renner Doyle stood on the steps flanked by Deputy Ward and 2 constables. He cleared his throat. "People of Ember Rock," he began, voice smooth as tar. "Mrs. Cain is wanted. Dangerous, immoral. But her trial continues in her absence justly. She took her husband's life. We have reason, and none of us owe her the courtesy of trust." There was polite stifled applause. Cleansed eyes looked away. Josie stood among the crowd, hidden by months of dust, yet on the edge of seeing. Then Sadie emerged from the crowd. She moved up to the front, carrying a small satchel. Judge Doyle's eyes flicked to her. "You know her," he snapped. Sadie squared her shoulders. "I do. I knew her when she was wife to Leonard. And I know Leonard when he decided to speak against you." She lifted the satchel and poured the leather journal and folded letter into her hands, brushing them in the sun. "This was hidden in the chapel ruin. This proves Leonard caught your scheme, land grabs, judges' money deals made behind closed doors." A hush swallowed the square. Josie stepped forward, cradling Sadie's elbow, eyes blazing. "He tried to expose you," Sadie continued. "You made him sheriff, to silence him. Then you had him removed, murdered, masked as accident. And you used his wife and child to gaslight us." Judge Doyle's face paled. "These are slanderous claims. Lies." From behind Calder moved a rifle slung low, eyes scanning tight-knit face. He positioned himself in support of Sadie and Josie, ready if violence broke. "Call me liar," Sadie spat. "But he wrote it all. He would have gone to court, to the territory judge. He died because you feared his truth." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Some looked faintly guilty, others angry. Then an older farmer known as Ben Forthley stepped forward, tears in his eyes. "It's true," he said, voice quivering. "I was there when Leonard talked. He said he had ledgers. Said Renner paid him hush money. I heard him." Another woman from the grocer's stand nodded. A third man, Harrod, admitted he'd taken a loan Leonard refused to sign documents for, because Doyle pressured him. The crowd shifted. Collective breath caught. Judge Doyle's mouth snapped shut. Deputy Ward backed away. Constables shied off. Calder's stance remained steady, rifle lowered, but ready. "People, this is not mob justice," Josie called out. "It's truth." Her voice resonated, broken yet firm. She held up Leonard's letter. Its ink faded, but convictions clear. The judge finally spoke. "I acted to build this town as sheriff. He could have destroyed us all with his greed." A tall man on the edge stepped forward, rope in hand. He jerked eye contact with Josie. "He destroyed Leonard," he whispered to no one. He placed news at the railing of the gazebo. At first Josie's heart leapt, but then she saw regret, not rage, in their faces. They fuzzily slung the rope over the balustrade, not to kill, but to symbolize the weight of collective guilt. One by one, 4 men stepped onto the scaffold. Among them, Judge Doyle's shoulders sagged. His whiskered jaw trembled. He didn't scream. Josie watched as the drop happened, quick, final. The 4 men swung listless until someone below severed their ropes. They dropped, faces blank in the overcast morning. Pealance swallowed the crowd. Calder lowered his rifle. Josie blinked away tears. "No more false lives," she whispered. Sadie joined her at the edge. "It's done." A hush turned to acceptance. Ember Rock had freed itself not with anger, but with sorrow-born resolve. Afterward, the sheriff arrived. He stepped out, silver star, pinned conspicuously. He offered Josie a nod, a silent admission that justice, late as it came, had arrived. She slipped Leonard's letter to the sheriff, proof for the territory judge. She turned to Sadie, then Calder. He didn't say anything, just placed a gloved hand briefly on her shoulder. Passing through the square, Josie felt the wind shift, no longer weighed by accusation, but tinged with possibility. Ember Rock would never be the same. She held up Leonard's ring, removed it from her bag and let it fall into a patch of dirt beneath a pine sapling. A bird chirped from above, wings rustling. Josie inhaled dust and sun, and she released her breath steady as justice claimed. Calder walked beside her. No promises, no words, just presence. They walked out of Ember Rock northward, turning toward unfinished trails on the map, and the truth it would still reveal. Summer softened the ridge, while Ember Rock recovered under sparse spring rain. The drought had cracked soil, but life stirred again among burned sage and fresh green sprouts. Josie Cain did not return as wife, nor as avenger. She came back as something else entirely, chance and a choice made flesh. She emerged from the timberland with crates and boards salvaged from old barns and fences. Beside the ridge, she set up a small schoolhouse, a single cabin with a wood stove, peeled logs, and a creaky chalkboard fashioned from an old door. Inside were a few benches, an iron kettle, and a shelf where she placed Leonard's shawl, folded beneath her teaching books. Children came, orphans of drought, forgotten by Ember Rock, trailing through dust to her door. They brought hunger and hurt, but Josie offered lessons in reading, writing, counting, and something deeper. She whispered psalms at dawn and stories of survival at dusk. Her teaching was quiet, steady, like the woman she'd become. Calder Hoyt came often. Sometimes he carried wood, other mornings tear or wild fruit. He never stayed long. Whether she was in class or gathering firewood there, he was present, steady, unspoken. He helped frame a new bench for her classroom, hammered nails for the roof, patched a leak in the stovepipe. His scars remained dark streaks under his sleeves, but no sign of softer light. Until one afternoon he found her at the edge of the clearing filling a small jar with stones and wild mint. He watched as she slipped into the jar, a tarnished gold wedding ring, Leonard's. Then she buried it beneath a young pine, pressing earth over it. A sparrow sang overhead, a faint free trill. Calder cleared his throat. "You burying the past." She touched her lips and smiled, a soft, certain curve. "Let it rest." They stood silent. The breeze moved the trees, sunlight pooled on the ground. No words were needed. Days stretched onward. The cabin filled with laughter, small children reading aloud, hands climbing chalk charts, whispers of discovery. Ember Rock's wary edges no longer reached here. The town's gaze softened. Sadie sometimes dropped in her eyes, reflecting pride more than pain. But most afternoons Josie and Calder walked the ridge. He rarely spoke of the past. She didn't ask. Instead, they shared purposeful silence. Sometimes she'd read to him verses from Leonard's journal, left intact lines salvaged from the church ruins. That gentle memory eased in both. Calder still carried his rifle not for bounty, but for protection, for wildlife or stray riders. In the evenings, while the children slept, Josie handed him a cup of tea by the fire. He never said more than thanks. Yet she could feel it in the way he brushed earth from her boots or tilted his head when she laughed at a child's mistake. Emotion lingered behind restraint. One evening, as the sun bled behind the ridge, Josie stepped away from the class into the yard. Calder was stacking wood. She watched him, a man shaped by solitude. She closed the door softly, came beside him. Without turning, he lifted the last log. His coat dusted dawn glow. She placed her hand on one calloused finger. He looked down. His eyes softened, vertiginous and deep. "Thank you," she whispered. He nodded, not quite acknowledgement, not apology, more like promise. That night, she stood alone outside the cabin, wind, carrying the faint chime of psalms from inside. The sparrow's song echoed in her memory. She turned toward the forest stars blinking awake. In the distance, she heard the familiar flap of wings. A sparrow glided across the ridgeline, casting a tiny shadow over pine needles. It cooed once, then vanished. She stepped closer to the cabin. Calder came to her side, stood beside her in the hush. They watched the horizon's bruised light soften into dusk. He reached for her hand, uncertain, gentle. She tucked her fingers around his. No word followed, no promises spoken. Only shared breath, shared presence, and something rooted in trust. Josie's life was no longer defined by what she lost, or by who she'd lost. She had no ring on her finger, but she held Leonard's legacy in books, in lesson, in children's hope. And beside her stood Calder's silent mountain, rooted and ungoofed when storms came. In the morning, the schoolhouse held chalk dust and sunlight. Birds fluttered near the window. Josie entered, calling the children. Somewhere beneath the floor, Leonard's ring lay buried deep, its promise released. And on the ridge, in the smell of pine and earth, she heard someone humming a psalm, a voice quiet, unwavering. She smiled to herself. No longer widow, but not forgotten.